Hi there, and thanks very much for tuning into this Explaining History videocast. If you're watching this, it probably means that you're doing an essay or maybe some coursework on the causes of the Holocaust. This is a very well-established debate, and there are various different phases of historiography. Now, there isn't time in this video to go through every different phase of historiography, so we're going to look at three: the intentionalist, functionalist, and synthesist arguments. Okay, so intentionalists began their writing almost directly at the end of the Second World War. Many of them saw firsthand the devastation in Europe and the evidence of mass killings. And they concluded that this must solely have been down to the thinking of Adolf Hitler, and that the main piece of primary evidence they had was the book Mein Kampf, in which Hitler makes explicit his hatred of the Jews. And there were other pieces of evidence, such as an interview he did with a journalist, Richard Hell, in 1922, where he demanded that Jews be hanged in every town and city across Germany. Now, these sorts of pronouncements from the early 1920s, and then the development of the Holocaust after 1939, there seemed to the early historians of the Holocaust to be a clear and linear connection. But of course there wasn't. History develops in a more complicated way than that. One of the main problems with the intentionists initially is the lack of primary sources that they cited. Many over-relied, particularly people like Lucy Davidovich, overly relied on Mein Kampf and didn't support it with other evidence. And they also started out with the thesis that they wanted to prove, which unfortunately really is the root to all bad history. You examine the evidence and hopefully a robust theory emerges from it, instead of starting with the idea and working backwards. So in the later 1960s, 70s, and all the way through to the 1980s, the functionalists were the dominant historiography. Some of the functionalists on the more extreme end, people like Gozali, argued that Hitler almost had no role in the Holocaust, and that if things were happening, it was not because he'd asked for them. This is pretty unsustainable, and as we'll see that when we look at the synthesist argument, not all functionalists believe that. Very few actually, but most functionalists believe that the reason why the Holocaust develops as it does, particularly after 1941 and the invasion of the Soviet Union, is that firstly, the Third Reich was a chaotic set of competing institutions and individuals all fighting for Hitler's favour, and secondly, this regime becomes radicalised and brutalised by the pressure of war, and already xenophobic and racist ideologies become genocidal as a result. And I think there's some important distinctions to make. Horrible and vile and hateful though the Nazis' policies throughout the 1930s towards the Jews were, they weren't actually at that point genocidal. They were xenophobic, they were attempting to remove the citizenship of Jewish people, marginalise them and economically plunder them. But before 1939, they're not overtly genocidal. Between 1939 and 1941, a set of changes occur when the new territories of the Warthegau and East Prussia are acquired by Germany and are incorporated into the Reich. the Jews, the Poles, the Roma, who were in those territories, were expelled, thrown out into the general government, which was the German-occupied part of Poland, which was seen as the racial dumping ground. This racial dumping ground becomes overcrowded with these millions of new people from where what had previously been Western Poland, and with the Jews, they are crammed into ghettos. The ghettos are not initially designed as parts of as sort of sites of genocide. They are designed really to be sites of concentration of individuals, a place simply just to cram Jews until something can be worked out about what to do with them. Now, the fact that the ghettos exist is a clue, really, that there is indecision, confusion, and uncertainty about the direction in which anti-Jewish policy is meant to go. And this is compounded by the fact that other plans, such as shipping the Jews to Palestine, which had been thought of in the 1930s briefly, and eventually ignored by Hitler, he didn't like the sound of that, and the Madagascar plan, shipping the Jews to French-owned Madagascar when France had been defeated and a collaboration regime had been installed. That's abandoned as well because the British still are the main dominant naval power. You can't, you cannot use a high seas strategy if you haven't knocked Britain out of the war. The plan to the General Plan Ost to conquer and colonize the Soviet Union, which is meant to be concluded in 1941, this fails as well because the Soviet Union isn't conquered in 1941. Instead, the Red Army manages to continue fighting, much against the expectations of Hitler, and so the hope of dumping the Jews on the other side of the Urals or in Siberia or finding somewhere to put them to work in Russia where they would die in large numbers, that's not possible. So when the failure to invade the Soviet Union becomes, to defeat the Soviet Union becomes a reality, all of a sudden mass industrialized genocide shoots up the agenda. By this point already, I use the word advisedly, but members of the regime have been experimenting with different methods of killing Jews. The mass shootings that were happening in Poland and then later in Russia and Ukraine and Belarus and places like Babi Yar, this is having a psychological toll on the murderers. Not we're meant to feel sympathy for them particularly, but it's what was happening. And Himmler was looking for more effective and more widespread measures. And gassing had already been experimented with throughout 1941. The Wannsee Conference in early 1942 is a conference to decide on the features of the final solution. But what Heydrich was really saying at the Wannsee Conference is that, well, to the delegates, he was saying essentially, you guys have all the pieces, you guys have been doing all these things already. Let us now get together and create a uniform policy across the Nazi Empire of specifically what will happen to the Jews, and let's just get it all organised and done very quickly. The reason why he says this is because probably, we don't know because it's never in writing and Hitler didn't write things down, probably Hitler had said something to Goering, Goering had said something to Himmler, and Himmler had said something to Heydrich about now finally the final solution of the Jewish question must be addressed. The reason why this chain of instructions had taken place, again, is more than likely to do with the fact that in December 1941, not only had the campaign in Russia ground to a halt and the Soviets had launched a huge counterattack outside Moscow, really throwing Hitler's plans into disarray, but also the United States of America had joined the war. Hitler had declared war in America, believing that America was run by the Jews, and now was the time for the last great struggle, and if they lost it, then it was okay because Germany would go down in flames. So it was the belief, really, that these events, and mistaken, insane, misguided belief, these events were somehow connected to the machinations of world Jewry. And Hitler said, well, we have millions of hostages here in Europe, and that they will have to be now. As I once predicted, they've dragged us into another war, and now they will feel the consequences. So there is a distinct relationship between the changing fortunes in the war and the development of the Holocaust, and also various functionaries within the Nazi state competing for Hitler's attention. So that makes the functionalist argument a lot more credible. Finally, let's look at the synthesist argument. This is mainly put forward by Ian Kershaw, in which he says, unlike with some of the functionalists where Hitler as a figure is kind of slightly shunted out of the picture, Hitler is centre stage in the synthesist argument, but as intentionalists would suggest. But, he says, the functionalist argument of there being regime chaos and the chaotic war circumstances, that's valid too. You put the two together and you get this idea that Kershaw calls working towards the Führer. And he says that Hitler spoke in broad, general terms, never in specifics. He never wrote things down. And there were a number of senior Nazis anxious for their positions who would listen to what Hitler was saying and try to interpret his will. Hitler never spoke in specifics because he never wanted to be really nailed down on anything. He never wanted to be held to account on anything, suspecting perhaps one day that he might have to be. So the reason why Kershaw suggests that Nazi policy radicalizes is that you have Hitler saying, well, these, speaking in general statements, something must be done about these Jews. Never going into specifics. Not that he wasn't thinking, I'd like to see them all murdered, because it's entirely likely that he was thinking that. But there were people such as Goering, Himmler, Heydrich, who knew their careers depended on coming up with solutions to the things they thought Hitler wanted, and Hitler probably did want. And hence, from there, you get the radicalisation of anti-Jewish policy. And certainly Hitler was well aware of what was happening. The idea that Hitler didn't know, historians such as Richard J. Evans, Ian Kershaw, have suggested that it's ludicrous to assume this, as Hitler was chiefly involved and fully aware of anti-Jewish policy and racial policy in general. In fact, it was his key area of interest. Now, I hope you found this useful. I've gone on for way too long today, but if you do find this useful, if you can like and share this video, I'm sure there's lots of people that will find it really handy. And also subscribe to this channel, because I'm going to be putting out every single week new how-to videos on how to approach modern history. Anyway, all the best. Thanks very much, and I hope this really helps you knock that essay out of the park. Take care. Bye bye.